Hey, what is going on? Welcome back to the 10-Minute Strength Pod. It's been about 6 months. We've been busy at the gym. I just, honest to God, haven't had time. I think we're putting even like one article a month out up on the site. I'm just spending so much time on the floor coaching. I just really haven't had the opportunity to get back on the mic, but here I am. Was on a podcast about 3 weeks ago called the Everything PT Podcast, and kind of lit a fire under me to get back in front of the mic and start talking about the things that I'm passionate about and that I care about. So here we are. Today we're going to go over a topic that we've gone over before, and it's sports-specific training. While I was on the Everything PT Podcast, we kind of got into it a little bit, what sports-specific training is, but I feel like I kind of deviated and didn't continue to talk about what I wanted to talk about. So we're going to pick it up here. What is sports-specific training? Well, it's training for the adaptations that you'll need for the field of play. If you ask 10 different strength coaches what sports-specific training is, you'd probably get 5 or 6 different answers. There's no real consensus here, but in my opinion, there should be. I'll tell you what sports-specific training is not. It is not training like your sport. It should not look like your sport. It should not typically use during the season the same angles that you're producing on the field of play. Your sport-specific training should be in a lot of ways what we call the anti-sport. It should be giving you the things that the field of play does not give you. This is how we increase overall athleticism, and this is how we make sure that we stay on the field of play year-round. Sports-specific training is an incredibly misunderstood topic. A lot of coaches think that it means throwing in the implements from the sport, making it look exactly like the sport, or taking sport movement skill and loading it in the gym, and it should be none of that. All right, so what we're going to go over today is specifically what sports-specific training should be. So we'll start off with what do all sports need? Like, what are the adaptations that they all need? They all need good base levels of strength. We need speed. We need power. We need mobility. And we need work capacity. Now, these 5 things are going to differ based on the sport, and this is where sports-specific training comes in. If we're talking about overhead throwers, right, there's probably a lot more attention paid, right, to shoulder care. If we're talking about hockey players and tennis players, we're probably talking, with tennis it'd be a little bit of shoulder care as well, but hips, right? Hips get locked up in athletes that are hinged throughout the majority of the playing time. Tennis is another one that's kind of funky. You're talking about trying to increase shoulder care and spend some time pulling, because every time they hit the ball or serve the ball, it's an internally rotated shoulder. It's shoulder flexion and internal rotation, so we have to combat some of that, right? So with tennis, sport-specific training becomes the anti-sport, all right? We don't focus nearly as much on internal rotation and flexion of the shoulder because we get a ton of that. Now, that doesn't mean that we neglect this movement. It means that we spend more time trying to undo some of the damage that all the reps on the field of play are giving us, right? In hockey players tend to have over tight hip flexors. Playboy in the 90s even wrote an article about how hockey players are the most pleasurable athletes to have intercourse with because of how tight their hip flexors are. So it's no secret that hockey players have locked up hips. It's not just the hip flexors, it's also the adductors. The abductors get overworked, and I'd say a good portion of the kids that I work with off the ice also have posterior hip capsule issues. And to be honest, I haven't figured out why that's the case yet. I just know I see it a ton. All right, so all sports need those things, but they get where their training deviates based on what the anti-sport is. All right, and we'll break this down. In season, your training should look nothing like your sport. Nothing. It should be the things that you're not getting on the field of play. You're getting plenty of volume doing your sports-specific skill on the field of play. You don't need more. That's what leads to overuse injuries. For example, a hockey player, right? A hockey player, during the season, we stay away from lateral lunges. The reason for that is because they are consistently pushing force vectors out in that direction. We're getting plenty of it on the field of play. We don't need to then load it and do it more off the field of play. Again, that's going to be what leads to these overuse injuries. With tennis players, we don't take a racket and hook up some kind of resistance to it and have them internally rotate a ton. All right, we do some internal rotation with tennis players, because even though everything's locked up and overused, we still need to attempt to gain some level of strength in like a very what's the word I'm looking for? Controlled environment, right? So in-season training, your sport, it should look nothing like your sport. Your off-season training, again, it should look nothing like your sport. What we're trying to do when we get out of the season is heal a little bit and reclaim some good positions so that we can increase that base level of strength. That increase in base level of strength along with some work capacity is going to be what lays the foundation for the rest of your off-season training. So again, we're getting away from the movements on the field of play because you've just got done killing yourself all season long doing those movements. All right. So increased strength, right? That's every sport. That's sports specific to everyone. Increasing speed, right? It's sports specific to everyone. You can't name even golf, right? We need to be fast. Power, another one. Mobility. Mobility changes based on the sport, what needs to be done. But again, all athletes need that mobility and work capacity. So that's what our off-season training looks like. When we get to the preseason, this is where things can shift a little bit. All right, we start focusing on speed of movement, and we start focusing on movement produced at the angles that we're going to need on the field of play. All right, so we try to increase overall speed and power with, you can use plyometric training, like again, I'll go back to hockey because that's kind of my wheelhouse. We talk about inside edge and outside edge foot lateral jumps. Right now we're producing force, power, speed, all that at the angles that we're going to need on the field of play. Granted, this still does not look like the sport, but what we're trying to do now that we've had all that time off from producing, force at those angles is to try to increase our ability to do that so when they go on the field of play, they're not beat down and they're not crushed. All right, it's good for overall development. It's good for getting them ready for the season, and having training that applies force in the angles that you'll need on the field of play prior to going out on the field of play is going to prepare them. That's just not something that they need year round. They need to get as far away from that kind of movement as possible when they're in their off season. All right, and then next thing I kind of want to touch on is training over the years. Right, so very early on, low training age, low biological age, your training needs to be very general. I actually had a parent kind of get on me because their kids who are 3 years apart, their training looked very similar, right? They may be 3 years apart biological age, but they are the exact same training age of 0. So a lot of their movements in the gym are going to look very similar because they have to learn how to squat, they have to learn how to hinge, lunge, push, pull, rotate, all that kind of stuff. So early on, your training is going to be very general, and this is designed to help increase your base levels of strength, increase our mobility, all the things we talked about before. When you get to your mid-career or higher training age, right? So we're talking about kids that are maybe late in high school, depending on when they started training, into college. The training gets like a lot more specialized. It can look slightly more like the sport. It can be a little bit more fun, and we can do some more things that are a little bit different looking because they've got that foundation set from doing all that general training for all those years. Right? So mid-career, when you have a little bit higher of a training age, it gets a little bit more specialized. And now here's where like a lot of people kind of drop the ball. When we get late into our careers and we have like a really high training age, and biological age, the training becomes more general again. Like there's a lot of studies that have shown that strength kind of sticks around. So we don't have to do the work that we did to create that strength so much anymore. Now that we've got it, we can just kind of work to maintain it a little bit. Who was it? Buddy Morris has his quarterbacks with the Arizona Cardinals. To be completely honest, I'm not sure if he's still there yet, but I remember hearing him talk about it a couple years back. They do push-up variations, right? They've spent all this time in their career doing all this kind of specialized and then early on very general training. Now they don't need that nearly as much because they've kind of they've created like very good movement patterns. They've learned to develop force in the proper ways, and they're already strong. So they do push-up variations instead of bench press variations. And that's because like their biological age and their training age dictate that that's what's appropriate for them. All right. So training over the years, we start off very general. Then we get somewhat specialized. Still in that specialization time, like we're still fairly general in our movement. And then late in our career, we get very general again, and we're able to kind of peel back and not push the athletes so much because they don't need it. They've already laid that foundation. All right, so sports-specific training in a nutshell, needs to be the anti-sport. It should look nothing like your sport for the vast majority of your training. Even when we do get into the preseason, it still really shouldn't look like your sport. We should just be trying to produce force at the angles that we'll need on the field of play, because that's going to prepare you to not get injured and all that. During the season, making our training look like our sport is what's going to lead to overuse injury. If you're out there and you're a hockey player and you're getting, I don't know how many strides you take in a practice, but it's got to be near 1,000, right? 1,000 strides producing force laterally in that frontal plane. Why the hell am I going to put you through more of that when we get off the field of play? You're missing everything in the sagittal plane. You're getting some transverse plane work on the field of play, but we focus our efforts with what you're not getting on the field of play. So if you've ever worked with a strength and conditioning coach, or even a personal trainer, an athletic trainer, and your training didn't look like your sport, they were absolutely doing their job. That's all I have for you today. Pretty quick one. Just wanted to get back on the mic and talk about a couple things. We'll be hoping to kind of push a little bit more out of this in the coming future. We're busy, but I think I figured out my schedule for the most part at this point, so I'll be able to set aside some time to do this kind of stuff. Hope everybody's having a good week, and happy training.